I don't think I've ever been more torn about a Boruto chapter before. On one hand, this chapter had some of the best narrative substance of all Two Blue Vortex chapters, addressed some things I was super happy to see addressed, had some really cool action, some really cool character moments, some actually funny moments, some tension building moments, and set the stage for two of my most anticipated plot points centered around the Shinju. But on the other hand, I can't believe some of the mind-blowingly baffling writing decisions that were made in this chapter. I acknowledge that last part will be a bit controversial, but please don't interpret that as me saying I hate the whole chapter. There's a lot I did like, and we'll cover both aspects, starting with what I liked and working our way towards what I didn't like, weaving in some questions and theories along the way. Moving in chronological order, I know this makes no sense in universe, but I always find it cool when they do the flashback fade into reality dialogue thing, where Kawaki in the present moment says the line he originally said in the flashback. In universe, he's just saying this line randomly out of nowhere, but it's a cool story effect and I don't think it's meant to be overanalyzed. Now as for the fight, I think this is the best and most creatively illustrated and choreographed fight in a very long time, and the best in Two Blue Vortex overall. Some people might disagree and that's fine, Boruto vs Jura is another pretty good contender, but personally I thought this fight had the best motion and the best variety of actually doing things. Every attack felt like it had a purpose. Rather than randomly shooting Biju bombs all over the place in weird ways after saying that was a bad idea, or stringing together random attacks that don't actually feel cohesive, every attack had a direction and made sense. Moreover, rather than drawing a still frame with a bunch of impact marks to indicate that multiple attacks took place, Ikimoto actually drew the motion of those multiple attacks, like when Kawaki stabbed Jura multiple times with his exploding rods on page 16. This was really well done. I also really like the creativity of Kawaki's new fighting style. Now you can argue it doesn't really make sense for Kawaki to be able to make his explosions come out of the rods like that, especially since Pain, Obito, Madara, Momoshiki, and Jigen never did this maneuver, but given that the rod's fundamental purpose is to transmit chakra through the receivers in order to restrict or control a target, I think it's reasonable for him to be able to transmit his chakra blast through them. As for the other characters not using this tactic, it's possible that you can only transmit pure chakra through the rods, like Kawaki's chakra blast, not elemental releases and other jutsu of that nature. If so, since Pain, Obito, and Madara don't seem to have this type of attack, Momoshiki could seemingly only release jutsu he had previously absorbed, and Jigen and Ishiki never display a pure chakra attack in the manga, though Jigen does have this weird nuke jutsu in the anime. It's possible that they simply can't do what Kawaki did here, or perhaps Kawaki came up with a completely new application of these rods. Either way is totally reasonable to me. There's also a panel of Kawaki swinging at Jura which feels like a reversal of two panels in Chapter A when Jura smacked Kawaki in a very similar fashion. Basically, payback's a bitch. Kawaki's hand also looks exactly like Coat's claws in this panel, which I thought was pretty cool and interesting. Obviously, Kawaki can just shapeshift his hands into whatever he wants, but this is the first time it looks so much like Coat's claws. Now in regard to Kawaki's abilities in this fight, there's a few things I like to note. First off, for whatever reason, Kawaki's dojutsu was never shown in this chapter. I've seen a lot of debate about whether Kawaki can even use the eye anymore, since historically they've almost always emphasized that dojutsu before Kawaki or Ishiki used Sukuna Hikona or Daikoku Ten, whereas they didn't in this chapter. But it's worth noting that Kawaki blatantly used Daikoku Ten without activating his eye in chapter 78 while explaining Daikoku Ten to Boruto. And interestingly, the Boruto database entry for Daikoku Ten doesn't mention that eye anywhere in the description, despite it almost always being emphasized when they use the jutsu, and despite it being mentioned in the database page for Sukuna Hikona. So it's really unclear how these abilities work, to be honest. We're getting a lot of mixed signals. We also still don't know what the heck the deal with Jigen's eyes are, since he seems to have the triangles in both eyes for some reason, but it's unclear whether those are actually the same triangles or something else, especially since the manga cover showed the triangles as being white instead of gold like Kawaki and Ishiki's. So long story short, we can't say for certain whether Kawaki can or can't use his eye anymore, or whether there's any benefits or drawbacks to using the abilities with or without the eye. We're simply gonna have to wait and see on that one, or maybe Ikimoto just forgot to draw in this chapter and it'll be changed in the volume release. Who knows? Moreover, because Kawaki never actually fought all out in Two Blue Vortex until now, and even then, I'd argue he still hasn't gone all out yet, we still don't know whether he couldn't use the cubes when his limiters were still on, or if he can only use them now that the limiters are off, especially since Kawaki might have been limited back in the Code and Prophecy arcs when he spammed the cubes on plenty of occasions. While his performance against Jura clearly shows the difference in Kawaki's power, it still would have been nice to see Kawaki go all out beforehand to get a more accurate comparison. That said, I was happy to see a clear difference in the size of Kawaki's Chakra Blast. In Chapter 12, base Kawaki blows Hidari up with a pretty small Chakra Blast. In Chapter 2, Karma when Kawaki blows up the Rinnegan Clawgun with a noticeably bigger Chakra Blast. And in Chapter 24, Kawaki makes a gigantic Chakra Blast much more akin to what he did against Code and Garo, but with only a partial Karma transformation this time around. So at the very least, we do have a clear picture of his power via his Chakra Blast. We also get to see the physical strength of these rods on full display once again, and they're practically indestructible. Jigen's rods were strong enough to block Sasuke's sword on multiple occasions, and were seemingly stronger than his own durability, given that he blocked the sword with his rods instead of just tanking it with his neck like Momoshiki. And Jura's finger has also been shown to be strong enough to block Sasuke's sword when Boruto wields it, and even chip it too. And as we see in this chapter, Kawaki's rods are strong enough to even block Jura's finger on multiple occasions. These rods are crazy strong. That said, it is worth mentioning that Jura might have broken some of Kawaki's rods on page 38 of chapter 23, since they do look pretty short there, but it's unclear whether Jura chopped the rods in half as he swiped across his body to block some of them, or if he just put his arms in front of his chest to block some rods, but several still landed anyway and the rods just look small. But given that the rods that do hit Jura look pretty small too, I'm inclined to believe he just blocked his chest with his arms, or he just slapped some of the rods away without breaking them. I actually wrote out a whole video on these rods a few years ago which explains what these rods actually are, how they're actually made, what their weaknesses truly are, and some misconceptions about these rods, and now that Kawaki's using them again in powerful ways, now might be a good time to finally release that video, so stay tuned for that in the somewhat near future. But anyway, let's finally move away from the fight and move on to some other topics. Over the past few chapters, Jura has repeatedly mentioned the negative side of love that he's witnessed over and over again, but failed to mention the positive side of love that he had witnessed through Ryu, that being Sarada. It was as if he'd been seeking to confirm his stance on love through Boruto, but after seeing Kawaki, he had no choice but to acknowledge Sarada's development, as well as Himawari's, and attributes that evolution to love, thereby acknowledging the dual nature of love, both the good and the bad. I really like this development for Jura. I'm not exactly the hugest fan of Jura drawing this conclusion based on Kawaki's power-up, which was really more about the limiters and modifications than it was about love, but I like the end result nonetheless. Now, as a hypothetical slight rewrite, if Kawaki had sprouted his horn and therefore unleashed a far greater level of power than ever before as an emotional response to the threat of Naruto being devoured, and then Jura made his conclusion about love leading to evolution, that would be more thematically on point and consistent with the other times Kawaki sprouted his horn, when Naruto's life was directly threatened. It would also just be cool for the audience, since we haven't seen that horn in a very long time and I miss it. To address loose ends, Boruto could then arrive and calm Kawaki out of that form, since Kawaki knows they're supposed to leave and doesn't want Momoshiki to emerge, the same way Boruto quickly calmed Kawaki down in this chapter as it is. While it's true that spreading the horn would likely increase the odds of Momoshiki taking over, Boruto did stand near Combo 1 Kawaki for several pages before flying away without much issue, so I think it's fine if he stands near Combo 2 Kawaki for half a second before Kawaki calms down, especially if he only starts to sprout the horn by the time Boruto arrives. Furthermore, this could actually do a few neat things for Boruto and Kawaki's characters. For Kawaki, it shows how touchy of a subject Naruto is for him, prompting him to lose his cool and almost risk Momoshiki emerging because of how mad Jura made him, and it also shows how close of a bond Boruto and Kawaki actually have if Boruto is able to calm him down. If the story wants to emphasize that brotherly bond, this could be one way to do so, and for Boruto's character, Kawaki will have put him in a perilous situation. If Boruto flees, he'd be leaving Kawaki all by himself in a relentless, angry onslaught against Jura, which could easily result in Kawaki's death, capture and imprisonment, or severely damaged ego. But if Boruto isn't able to immediately calm him down, Boruto could seriously risk losing control to Momoshiki, something he deeply fears. However, Boruto doesn't have time to waste, because if he stays right where he is, Momoshiki will definitely emerge, and Kawaki will definitely be left to fend for himself. Boruto has to make a choice immediately. So when Boruto chooses to calm Kawaki down despite knowing the risk, it's that much more impactful that he chooses the well-being of his brother over his own, because there is a dangerous risk to him doing so. It shows just how far Boruto is willing to go for Kawaki, and it shows Jura just how strong their brotherly bond is and how much they're able to accomplish with it. Jura would literally see Kawaki become immensely angry due to love, and then be quickly calmed due to love. Both the good and the bad. Exactly what Jura is witnessing anyway. I think this would be a nice touch, and it would also give Jura an actual reason to believe Kawaki's power-up is due to love, instead of just baselessly assuming it to be the case for no reason. But let me know if you agree or disagree. Now, something I forgot to mention earlier is that Jura can heal on his own. He doesn't need to go to that giant tree to heal like the other Shinju do. I was super happy to finally see this addressed. You could argue that Jura probably shouldn't actually need to use wood style at all to heal himself, since the Ten Tails grants his Jinchuriki automatic healing powers, and Jura commented on the fact that Himawari's healing power was similar to that of a Biju and far beyond that of a Jinchuriki, implying that the Ten Tails and Jura himself should probably be able to heal automatically. But you could also argue that Biju healing essentially just accelerates and amplifies the body's natural healing power, but since Jura is made of wood since he's the divine tree, there is no natural healing power, so he has to use wood style instead. Well, that's complete headcanon, but that's how I justify the wood style usage. Not that it really matters all that much. I'm just glad he doesn't need to go home to that tree to heal, and can instead do it whenever and wherever he wants with his own trees. Now, something interesting about this is that Jura was able to heal his Rinnegan eye, which probably isn't made of wood, which to my memory is the first time you've ever seen someone regenerate a dojutsu outside of maybe an Edo Tensei, but even that I'm not sure of. This is of course because everyone whose dojutsu was destroyed didn't have regenerative powers, but Obito seemed to think that Madara's Rinnegan would stay destroyed despite still possessing Hashirama cells and lingering six-path powers, and he didn't seem to think Madara could heal it by plopping it in his own eye socket, so it remains unclear whether other people can heal destroyed dojutsu or not. Either way, Jura definitely can, which is very dangerous because not only does it make it that much harder to work around his Rinnegan abilities, but his wood style regeneration can also be used offensively and defensively at the same time while he regenerates, and it might even have ninjutsu absorption properties, given that Jura didn't really seem to take any damage from Kawaki's humongous chakra blast, and instead only seemed to heal his injuries from before. But that could also just be because he straight up tanked the attack, healed the damage from that last attack first, or something else, so I'm not going to say anything too definitive for now. Next up, I want to talk about two things that got me super excited. These are the two plot points I mentioned in the intro to the video. First up is Mamushi. Mamushi's on the move, baby. This guy has single-handedly managed to become one of the most hyped Two Blue Vortex characters despite doing almost literally nothing. He's almost exclusively been laying down at the hideout this entire time, but the very few little things he has done are just so hype, and I can't wait for him to turn up soon. Every time he just sees Eida, I get so excited. Now, this chapter sort of implies that Mamushi was never gonna make a move, or at least not for a while longer, if Boruto hadn't gone off Koji's script, which is kinda weird, but at the end of the day, what we all wanted from Mamushi was for him to make a move, and now he's doing it. So I guess it doesn't really matter what would have happened in an alternate universe. That said, because they did make this implication, I would like to see some sort of interaction between Mamushi, Jura, and Hidari that leads to Mamushi making a move, rather than him just getting up and making a move randomly without a word. Let's capitalize on this plot point we've already established as much as we can. Now, based on Koji's updated visions with 10 directions, it seems most likely that Mamushi's gonna fight Damon, which I'm sure many fans are hyped about. But I personally prefer Mamushi to fight someone else first before fighting Damon, unless Mamushi's gonna be revealed to be by far the strongest Shinju after Jura, since I don't really want to see Mamushi just get stomped by Damon, nor do I want to see Damon struggle against Mamushi when he should still be stronger than Boruto and Kawaki based on every implication we've gotten so far. So either Mamushi is revealed to be the strongest Shinju after Jura, or Mamushi fights someone else first. That's my personal preference. Given that Mitsuki has yet to actually shine in like 60 chapters and is on his way home now, this could be a perfect opportunity for Mitsuki to get a big moment, or perhaps Delta, who hasn't actually done anything in Two Blue Vortex yet, or perhaps Eida herself if she's forced to throw some hands. There's lots of routes they could take, but either way, I'm super excited for Mamushi. The next thing I was super excited about is Jura going after Naruto again. I never dropped my hope to see this plot point come back, but after 16 chapters of Jura not mentioning Naruto ever since he met Himawari, you can imagine I was slowly becoming worried that he never mentioned him again. Thankfully, Naruto is still on his mind, and he finally expressed some of the underlying reason why he wants to devour Naruto in particular. It's not because Naruto has the 9 tails, but because he shared a deep bond with All 9 Biju, which Jura believes to be related to his study of love. I always thought it should be for a deeper reason than just Naruto has the 9 tails, but this is the first time we actually got something specific. What's also interesting about this is that Jura's choice of target and reasoning behind it suggests my theory that the Shinju's target doesn't need to be a person that their original human source shared a deep bond with, and can instead be a result of other factors. Of course, Jura's reasoning does relate to love at its core, but it isn't because Jura loves Naruto or loves the tailed beast, but because Naruto loves the tailed beast, and Jura wants to understand that. At first, Jura likely lacked enough comprehension about love at all to have this deep of a reason, so his initial instinct to devour Naruto was likely due to Naruto's bond with the tailed bees, who are each part of the 10 tails, and over time, that reasoning simply grew stronger as he became more and more interested in love and other types of bonds. Moreover, since Jura correctly deduced that Naruto is still alive as a result of his conversation with Kawaki, I'm hoping to see Damon's warning in chapter 6 finally come to fruition, since Jura definitively knows Naruto is still alive now, and might reveal this to Himawari or someone else in order to indirectly learn Naruto's whereabouts. That would be pretty cool. It would amplify the tension between Kawaki and the villagers, since they would know Naruto's still alive, know Kawaki lied about Naruto's death, know Boruto was telling the truth all along, and might pressure Kawaki to release Naruto, putting Kawaki in an unfavorable position. That's a situation I'd like to see Kawaki confront, as it could react in many different ways, all of which affect the story in drastically different ways. But let me know what you think Kawaki's next move in this situation would be. Now, closely related to this, I've seen a lot of debate about whether or not Jura is under the effects of omnipotence, and I'll just quickly say for now that I don't think he's currently affected by the memory swap, but I'll save the explanation for his own quick video to keep this review from being an hour long. Couple other small things I liked about this chapter. I really like Jura's sitting pose when he had his fists rested on his chin. It looks exactly like Jigen sitting on his throne in several chapters, and also looks a lot like momoshiki sitting on those spikes in chapter 10, or when he sat on the tree branch in chapter 65. I don't know if it was meant to be a callback to either character or not, but it felt like one nonetheless, which I thought was cool. And finally, I like some of the humor in this chapter, like when Kawaki landed on Konohamaru's face and they started arguing, and especially Boruto's goofy face when that happened. Scenes like this make me smile, and I wish Ikimoto did stuff like this a little more often. I also thought it was funny when Hidari showed Jura the new word he learned, and I'm very curious whether Hidari was seriously saying "totally ick" to Jura's behavior, or if he was just being kinda clueless about how to use the word properly. Either way is pretty funny though. Now, since the review is getting pretty long, I'm just gonna go ahead and kinda blitz through the rest of this, but as I mentioned at the beginning of the video, there's a few things I was not a huge fan of. The first few you can definitely chalk up to being nitpicks, but they're still unnecessary oddities. First up is the beginning of the chapter. I'll go a little more in depth in another video about some borderline plot holes in this arc, but I find it completely nonsensical how in chapter 15, Boruto tells Kawaki about the limiters, then gets up and says, "I'm leaving," then Kawaki says, "Alright, I'll team up with you," and then they throw their brotherly jabs at each other, clearly finished with their conversation for now, only for Boruto to stop leaving to tell Kawaki about the most important part of their conversation that his entire life depends on, and is the entire reason Kawaki needs to get his limiters off right away. And more importantly, for Eida to have been watching that conversation, only to be completely surprised and confused when Kawaki shows up, and to be turning to Koji for answers when she should already know the plan since Boruto laid it out pretty clearly for Kawaki. I find it completely ridiculous for Eida to randomly stop watching that conversation if it isn't over yet, and I find Boruto's conversation to be very awkward in hindsight. And not just Boruto, but Kawaki too. At the end of chapter 15, Kawaki explains how everything is the Otsutsuki's fault and that they all need to be exterminated, including Boruto and himself, but they'll start with the divine trees using any means necessary, including Kawaki teaming up with Boruto. Then moments later in real time during the chapter 24 flashback, when Boruto tells Kawaki to go to the Sand Village, Kawaki's reaction is, "Jura's strong. I don't think adding any more of us is gonna make a difference." Like, bruh, are you planning to eliminate the divide trees using any means necessary or not? This is especially weird when you consider that Kawaki goes on to ask Amado to make him an even bigger, badder monster than Boruto could in the Shinju using any means necessary. If he thinks Jura is so strong that adding offensively amped Kawaki to the team won't make any difference, why does he think Amado can make him an even bigger, badder monster than the Shinju? What is Kawaki's stance on this? Up next is absolutely a nitpick, and I'm well aware of this, but in chapter 23, Koji's updated 10 directions showed Jura covering his eye, only for that scene to never happen. Now look, I know not every future Koji sees necessarily happens, but it's just weird to show the update resulting from Kawaki's involvement, only to get something different. I get that Ikimoto probably didn't want to spoil Kawaki stabbing Jura's eye, but you don't need to change the 10 directions update itself. Just have Jura cover his eye for a single panel. It doesn't even have to be the same angle. Just have him do it, the same way Ikimoto did for Boruto's future visions from chapter 75 when those happen in real time. This isn't some big red herring misdirection type of thing. It's a completely insignificant detail. Why didn't he draw this scene? I know it doesn't matter, but it's just weird. This next one isn't an issue when you examine this arc in isolation, but it's pretty annoying when you look at Two Blue Vortex as a whole. The premise of Boruto's predicament with Jura in this arc is that it takes him a bit of time to focus on a flying Raijin marker if he's not close by, which is made even harder by fighting a powerful opponent who's trying to kill him. That makes perfect sense at face value. However, we've previously seen Boruto quickly focus on faraway markers in the heat of battle on more than one occasion. In chapter 11, Boruto flew towards Himawari who fought Jura outside the Leaf Village. Raptor, then Koji told Boruto to teleport to the square marker that was near Sarada, meaning Boruto didn't already know which shape to lock onto in advance, yet he still instantly teleported to Sarada's location. This teleportation was most likely a lot longer of a distance than the one Boruto did in chapter 24, since it was just a short running distance away for Konohamaru, whereas it was quite a long flying distance for Kawaki in the Himawari situation. Yet Boruto was able to instantly lock onto the square no problem in the previous arc, whereas he needed an extended period of time to find the marker he pre-planned to use in advance in the current arc. He was also able to instantly teleport to Sasuke's tree in a whole other dimension when he was ganged up on by the Shinju in chapter 4, instantly sensed the piece of metal floating in the air near Konohamaru and Matsuri all the way from Koji's hideout, and while it wasn't instant, he still managed to sense Code's location in a whole different dimension in chapter 3, much faster than he sensed the leaf symbol a short running distance away in chapter 24. Based on these feats, why couldn't he just teleport to the piece of metal Mitsuki picked up in chapter 17? This wouldn't apply to the Sarada or Code examples, but let's just say he pre-sensed the markers in advance for all these other situations. Why couldn't he plant the leaf symbol in that location before the mission started so he could pre-sense its location? Or just plan to use the other piece of metal that was already in that area? It feels wrong to emphasize this dangerous predicament for Boruto when it was completely unnecessary due to Boruto's previously shown skills or easily avoidable with some more efficient planning. Now for these last two things, I'm gonna be honest, I've had some stuff happen in my real life, and I just don't have the heart to finish this video, so I'm just gonna list the things I didn't like and not really explain them. I'm not a fan of Jura just letting Boruto turn around and walk away without at least trying to stop him. especially if he says that Boruto still needs to die in a future chapter. And after all that emphasis on the sword in chapter 22, the subject matter of love in this arc, and the fact that Sasuke's sword chipped in chapter 23, I'm a bit disappointed that Boruto had nothing to say or think about his sword being chipped, despite telling Jura that he would suffer a fate worse than death if he were to do anything to that sword. So much for that threat. And it's not even that he didn't have a chance to say anything. Kawaki had to stop Boruto from leaving so that Kawaki could say a couple things to Jura, and Boruto still had nothing to say. Normally, I'd like to elaborate further on these points, but I've already taken forever as it is, and I just don't have any more heart left in this video. Let me know what you guys thought about this chapter in the comments below. Watch this video here for more of my content, subscribe, like the video, and turn on notifications to help the channel out, and become a member as well. Thank you guys for watching.